It was about, I think I was third grade. Third grade, and it's kind of where my memories start of my childhood. I don't remember
Yeah.
a lot prior to that, but childhood trauma, that kind of, you forget
Mm-hmm.
everything up to that because those things kind of stand out. So some of the key memories that I tend to talk about, that kind of led to the split between my mom and my dad was, my dad at the time was selling dope in Washington D.C. That's where that was
Mm-hmm.
the naval base that we was on. It was in Maryland, and I actually remember going. I didn't tell you this. I actually remember going on some runs with him too. As an
Oh
adult
wow.
now, I realize what he was doing, but as a kid, I just thought we was dropping him off wherever he was trying to go to work. I mean, he was going to work, but not the kind of work that I thought he was going to.
Correct. Correct.
Um, there was a moment I was in a car with him and his boys, and they was just passing around the crack pipe, put that to my mouth. My dad, wasn't just hustling in the streets selling dope. He was hustling with other females too, even though he was married to my mom. So he used to take me
Mm-hmm.
and my younger brother, who I didn't mention. So it was my dad, my mom, and my younger brother. I'm gonna get to my sister in a minute. Um, he used to take us over to this one lady's house, and that was the last lady I believe he was with.
Mm-hmm.
That I can remember that he cheated on my mom with. But I remember walking upstairs. She had a son. We was kind of hungry, needed something to eat. I was in an unfamiliar place. I'm trying to figure out like what we can get into. So I
Yeah.
walked upstairs to ask my dad what was going on. They was on the bed smoking crack, whatever the case is. And then the last little two pieces, there's two more. I don't know why they fought. I've talked to my dad and my mom about it. They have different stories as an adult, but
Sure.
I remember my dad coming home just super agitated. And the argument kind of went in this square, went through like the hallway right when you walk in off to the side of the hallway with some stairs that went upstairs, a bathroom. The hallway led into the family room den area. Off to the left was the dining room. They're following that around. When you come in past the dining room, the pantry's off to the right, and now you're into the kitchen. That's when I see my dad grab my mom, and now they back out into that hallway where they started at. Bro, he knocked her clean out. Like, I know
Wow.
this is not what happened, but like as a kid, this is how I remember it. I remember blood flinging off her face onto the wall.
Mm.
And he was on top of her, hitting her. So I jumped on his back trying to protect my mom, and he hit me. He flung me up against the wall. And
Wow.
I think it was at that moment when he realized what he did to his son, not necessarily his wife, but his son. He kind of backed off, and I remember the police coming and taking him away or whatever. And my mom moved around a lot. At that point, we tried to stay up north just because she was working for some prominent law firms and such.
Yeah.
And it was shortly thereafter they tried to like reconcile stuff. So this is my last memory of my father before we came down to Florida.
Okay.
Playing Super Mario Brothers. I hadn't seen my dad for a minute, and he came into the house, and I was like, "Dad, you want to sit down with me and play?" And he was like, "Nah, I ain't got time for that." And he left. So I remember a few days later, my mom woke us up, and she was like, "Grab everything you can. We're leaving." So we just half the house we left, like literally just left it there.
Wow.
I don't have baby pictures. I don't have pictures when I was young. There's very few that I've collected over the years
Yeah.
that I hold on to that I've kind of gathered from family and stuff. But like we came down here with nothing. We hopped on
Wow.
a train. Uh, that came down here to Florida. I met my white family for the first time because up in DC, that's where my black family lived. I ain't even know I my mom was white, but I ain't even know I had a white family. Like that just
Right.
didn't register in my little mind. So I met her parents, and I meet this young lady that they had that was introduced to me as a cousin. But my mom low key said, "This is your sister." I didn't even know I had a sister. I was in third grade before I found that out. And good people, but there was definitely some racism that was existent. So the story starts to come out about how my mom even ended up north with my dad and our black family. When she married a black man, they disowned her. They was like, "You ain't a part of this family no more." which is why we never met them.
Right, right.
And my sister came from a previous marriage, so she's my half sister. And so when my mom got married, she kind of gave up the rights, parental rights, to her dad at the time, and then her
Wow.
dad gave up parental rights to my grandparents, my mom's parents. So they had been raising, Roxanne was her name. They had been raising her for as long as I've known.
Wow.
Um, so it was this weird dynamic because we was up north and I was around a lot of. I always had in my mind like being down in DC and being around my black family, like super intelligent. Right, DC is the hotbed of
Right,
black
right.
intelligence. You know what I mean? So I just remember all these professional women in my life, and like my black family is super intelligent, super sharp, just with it. I mean, my grandma's in her 70s right now, and she just launched her own business. Like she just
Wow.
waking up,
Shout out to grandma.
yeah, they stay. She retired. She worked for the Pentagon, retired like 3-4 years ago, and then in COVID, she was like, "I'm gonna open up my own business," and has been thriving ever since. Like that's just how my black family
That's
moves
awesome.
like that, man. They just always hustling and doing things. But when I came down here and was with my white family, we lived with my mom's sister and her husband and two cousins. So it was the four of us in a bedroom. My mom slept in one bedroom and my aunt and uncle in another bedroom. And they were
Mm.
violent too, man. They used to get into fights all the time. I remember one time my aunt was on one side of the living room, my uncle was on the other. They fighting, cursing at each other, cigarettes hanging out their mouth. My aunt picked up a fresh pot of coffee and threw it across the living room at him and smashed on the wall and stuff. So I
Ooh.
came up in, it wasn't like violence all the time, but it was significant enough for me to
Sure.
remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my white family, like they was racist, man. It was times my aunt would come over when we finally moved out and got our own place. It's times she come over to the house. My mom was working 3 jobs, so she went home. She was trying to do the best to provide for us.
Right.
My aunt will come over in a drunken stupor, be banging on the door. We could say stuff, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
cursing, but I'm about to
No,
say
no.
something.
Hey, yeah. We can
That's all right.
speak freely. We can speak freely. There's an adult
Okay.
area.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I want to make sure. She come over to the door, knocking, banging, talking about, come outside, you nigger lover. She
Wow.
say stuff like that all the time, man. Like, I don't know. It was a mess. And then with my grandparents, my grandpa, I used to tell when I got old enough, I was about 18, 19. I was like, Mom, I don't want to go down there no more. He used to make me legit, man, pick like rose bushes, clean the house. Uh, I felt like he was treating me like a slave. That's what it felt like.
Wow.
And again, they were good people. I think there was generational things that was going
Yeah.
on, and they just kind of thought one thing. My grandma, I know she loved me to death, but it just was very uncomfortable there. It'd be times my sister would call us a nigger and stuff, and I didn't like
Mm.
being down there, you know. But
Yeah.
that was what we had because we left from up north. So fast forward, my dad calls. I hadn't seen him for years, just down here living, doing stuff with my mom. I was helping my mom clean hotel rooms from third grade all the way up to like eighth grade. But my dad reaches out to us when I hit fifth grade. And I start to realize what's going on because he would call collect all the time. He got locked up. He got sentenced 53 years.
Wow.
Um, and so I didn't have a relationship prior to him being locked up. That last time I seen him was when I was playing Mario Brothers, and he was like, "I ain't got time for this, son."
Right. Right.
So he got convicted up in Virginia. We were down here in Florida. So my relationship with my father was built with him being locked up behind bars on collect phone calls and us being able to visit him maybe like once a year until we got him moved down here to Florida when I was in high school. I think it was the latter years of my high school time. So I will say one of the good things about my relationship with my dad is my dad did he got saved when he was in prison and did introduce the Lord to me. I was about 13. And to be quite honest, like that probably is what saved me. Because at that point, um, I was a good student, but I had a nasty little attitude. And it wasn't, I was super quiet. But the
Hmm.
thing is, like when I told you I moved around a lot up north, especially, my mom would try to put us in good schools, which were predominantly white. And within the first week, it was some white kid calling me a nigger or my brother. So they was catching these hands real quick, and I would
Right.
get kicked out all the time. And then we did talk a little bit about this. My mom, so I was at these white schools. I was too dark for them, right? My
Right.
mom put me at a black school. That was the last place that we were at before we moved down here to Florida, and they was going in on me at the black schools, and I'm having to fight people that I'm like, wait a minute, I'm one of y'all. Like, what's going on? And then
Right.
I moved down here to Florida, and I'm at this school. And he ended up being a good friend of mine in high school, but it was an Asian dude. He done called me the N word, so he had to catch these hands too. So I was like constantly just, my emotional regulation was very low. So certain
Yeah.
things would just set me off, and I would just fight. I got kicked out in fourth grade for knocking my fourth grade teacher out. I was fighting a kid that called me the N word. Somebody grabbed me. I thought it was his boy. So I just turned around swinging. Man, it was my 60-something-year-old fourth grade teacher. I done laid
Wow.
her out. So they kicked me out in fourth grade as well. So had I not been introduced to my faith journey at that time, I probably would have ended up down the same path. As I said to you before, it
Yeah.
was a time where my dad was locked up. He just got out 2 years ago. My brother was locked up my senior year. My mom was locked up. So I'm literally the only one that hasn't been locked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I got saved, I stayed busy with church. I was in high school now at this point. So I was basketball, track, cheerleading, chorus, uh, fellowship of Christian athletes. Like, I just stayed busy. So there was no room for me to get in trouble. And because I was involved in so much, I had to adjust my attitude, because
Of
I would have
course.
lost all of those things if I was getting kicked out. So
Yeah. No, that's
um
absolutely important.
I I think that covers most of my upbringing,
I mean,
unless we get into adulthood, but that's the kid stuff right there.
no, no, no. But that's a lot to to digest. I
Yeah.
appreciate all the transparency there, because you did cover a lot. I mean, I can definitely imagine that there's a lot of young men out there in particular that can relate to that type of story. Especially if we just break it down in the context of those of us that don't have fathers in our homes, or in or don't have a prevalent role in our life,
Yeah.
right? Which you were making that point off and on.
Yeah.
And to take it a step further, right? Even when you were talking about, to try to couple in with that, we'll get deeper into this, the identity aspect. When you were talking about when you have two different ties of your family that aren't from the same racial or ethnic background, and how sometimes that can play in how the children are treated, or in your case, severely mistreated. I would say that's severe mistreatment. I mean, obviously you can't be
Mm-hmm.
throwing out an N word like
Yeah.
that and think it's not going to play on a young man or young woman's mind, right? And it's interesting when you were describing that. So you were talking about how your family would say that to you, but then in this, and obviously, like, I didn't hear you. At least there's a different example. I didn't hear you say you put hands on them. But then in all these examples in school, people are saying the same thing. You're like, everybody got to get the business.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, like, that to me, when you explain that, like in the order that you explained it in chronologically, that makes perfect sense why you were so sensitive. Not just because the word is power, we already know that part, but the fact that you're being mistreated with that word being weaponized against you in your home with your
Mm,
family that,
mm,
obviously you didn't grow up with your whole life, but you spent some time with them. Then you're in school and these people are using it to antagonize you,
mm-hmm.
right? Or your
Yeah.
brother. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, the reason why I make that point is because sometimes we're not as aware of the environments that we come up in and how it shapes our perception of ourselves and of our reality.
Yeah.
So the way we behave with people is different. Like, that to me was a beautiful example of how, if you're mistreated so much, you're going to act out in other ways. You might not be able to act out in your home, right? Because you might be in a hostile environment where somebody will check you, like a man may check you if
Yeah.
you were a young man.
Yeah.
But in school, when you got your peers, you're like, hey, you better not talk to me like that, because you're going to get the business if you think that I'm going to let that slide. Because I'm
Yeah.
already being mistreated over here at home. You're not
Yeah.
about to do that to me over here. You get what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. You know what? All the years of therapy and stuff, I have never made that connection until you just now articulated
Oh,
that.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I get it because of the work that I've had to do and also the environments I came up in. Like I grew up in a lot of these hostile environments when I was young and seen a lot of young men who didn't have fathers around, who their moms were primarily raising them. And a lot of times they're wild, you know, and it's not, I don't think it's because young men don't respect mothers or nothing like that. I think that's, it just goes to speak to the importance of having the male figure
Mhm.
in their life. Their
Mhm.
father is the most ideal person to have, even if the two of us aren't together, to still play a significant role, if you get what I mean. Because sometimes I don't want us to misconstrue, well, it wasn't a healthy relationship like you were talking about, you were describing, right? Your mother and
Yeah.
your father, that wasn't a healthy relationship. So we don't necessarily want those people staying together just for the sake of the children or just staying together, because it's
Yeah.
going to negatively impact them. Because,
Yeah.
right, because the stories you're telling is not what I'm sure you want, which we'll get into later, your children to be telling those stories, which I'm sure
Yeah.
they would never. But we know how that can play on you and on your mind. And so to that point, I think it's better to have the father present, because more often than not, the child may be with the mother. But
Yeah.
if it's in a healthy relationship, we don't need to be living in the same house. We don't need to be in a romantic relationship, but we need to collaborate and co parent
Yeah.
effectively. I deal with
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to make that point for those out there that may be in that type of situation, because your lived experience sounds like it can negatively impact the way that children behave outside of the home because of what you're forcing them to witness and observe. I don't know if you
Yeah.
would agree, with
No,
that.
I know I totally agree with RJ. Like when you're saying that, especially for people listening, the research so there's two parts to this. I focus really on fathers, but the
Hmm.
research on having an absent parent and the detrimental effects it has on kids it, it's one of the saddest things ever.
Yeah.
But even more than that is when you have an absent father. People don't realize how important the father figure is in a
Oh
house.
yeah.
To have a present, actively engaged father, the positive impact that that has. And when you remove that, the outcomes for both female and male children,
Yes.
it's bad, man.
It's
It's bad.
disastrous.